That was until the day I discovered he was spending our entire retirement savings on expensive gifts for our neighbor, Sabrina, the same woman I had treated like a daughter and helped through every tough time since she was widowed. What I didn't know was that this discovery was just the beginning of a web of lies so deep it would threaten the life of my 12-year-old grandson, nearly get me forcibly committed, and transform me from a submissive housewife into the most feared and respected woman in Maple Creek. At 64, after 42 years of a devoted marriage, I thought I knew all of my husband George's secrets. If you're over 60 and think you know the people around you, get ready to find out how I unmasked one of the most dangerous con artists to ever set foot in Ohio, saved my family from financial ruin, and proved that underestimating an experienced woman's intelligence is the biggest mistake anyone can make. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened at our town's annual 4th of July festival will leave you breathless and show you that it's never too late to fight for your dignity. My hand trembled as I held the receipt I'd found in the pocket of George's blazer. Expensive jewelry, very expensive, from a shop downtown in Maple Creek that I had never set foot in. The faded paper showed a date from 3 months ago, and I knew for a fact I hadn't received any gifts during that time. My heart pounded, and an icy chill ran down my spine when I read the amount, $2,400. It was nearly our entire monthly retirement income. I just stood there in the laundry room, the smell of detergent mixing with the strong perfume that seemed to cling to his clothes lately, a perfume that definitely wasn't mine. My name is Norma. I'm 64 years old, and in that moment, it felt as if my entire life of 42 years of marriage was crumbling in my calloused hands, worn from a lifetime of caring for my home and family. George was at the auto shop as usual, fixing cars for our neighbors and other folks around town. He was respected here in Maple Creek, known for his honesty and good work. Everyone said I was a lucky woman to have a husband like him. For all those years, I believed it too. He always came home tired, covered in grease, complaining about his aching back, and I would have dinner ready, do the laundry, and get everything organized so he could rest. It had been our routine for decades, a routine I thought kept us united and happy. But things had been different lately. George was coming home later, taking longer showers, choosing his clothes more carefully. When I asked about work, he'd answer in monosyllables, his eyes glued to the cell phone that used to be forgotten in some corner of the house. Now he carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When it rang, he'd step outside to answer, claiming it was work-related. I even mentioned his changed behavior to my neighbor Dorothy, who's 58 and lives next door. But she just laughed and said that men get a little strange after 60. The receipt burned in my hand. I had to find out who the jewelry was for. My mind started racing, replaying the last few months, searching for signs I might have ignored. The extra trips out on weekends, always with excuses about emergencies at the shop, the whispered phone calls, the way he avoided my gaze when I talked about our future, about the kitchen remodel we'd been saving up for 2 years. I tucked the receipt away in my dresser drawer, between old photographs of our children when they were small. Children who were now grown, with lives of their own in other cities. It was just me and George now, or at least that's what I thought, until I found that piece of paper. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for so many years and looked around the room. Everything was the same, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. I thought of my grandson, Jacob, 12 years old, my daughter, Marcia's son, who lived in Columbus. The boy had severe respiratory problems and needed constant doctor's appointments, expensive medications, and physical therapy sessions. Marcia was struggling financially after her husband lost his job, and George and I helped however we could. I saved every penny, bought the cheapest groceries, sewed patches on clothes instead of buying new ones, all to be able to send a little money to help with Jacob's treatment. And now I discovered that George was spending the equivalent of 3 months of the help we sent our grandson on jewelry. Rage began to boil inside me, but with it came a deep pain, a sense of betrayal that was a physical ache in my chest. How could he do this? How could he lie to me every day, kiss my forehead in the morning, share meals with me, watch TV beside me on the couch, all while knowing he was deceiving me? That afternoon, when George came home from work, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner as I always did. I watched his every move with different eyes. The way he avoided kissing me, heading straight for the shower, the extra care he took choosing a clean shirt, the way he checked his phone every 5 minutes during dinner. I tried to make small talk about his day, about customers at the shop, but he responded mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. After dinner, while he watched the news in the living room, I went to the drawer where I kept our financial documents. I looked over bank statements, expense notes, the little notebook where I tracked our retirement funds. The numbers didn't add up. Money was missing, and now I knew where it was going. How many other receipts had I not found? How many other gifts had he given his mistress while I was darning old socks to save money? Finding that receipt was only the beginning. I didn't know yet that my life was about to be turned upside down, that I would discover things about my husband and my neighbor that I could never have imagined. Sitting there in the kitchen, with the sound of the TV in the background and the awkward silence that had settled between us, I had no idea this was just the first of many devastating revelations awaiting me. That night, lying next to George, I feigned sleep while he scrolled on his phone. The screen's light illuminated his face in the dark, and for the first time in 42 years of marriage, I looked at the man sharing my bed and felt completely alone. He was there physically, but his heart, his mind, his thoughts were somewhere else, with someone else. And the worst part was, I still didn't know who this person was, who had stolen my husband from me. The days that followed were a silent torture. I kept up the pretense of normalcy, preparing meals, cleaning the house, making small talk, but inside I was shattered. Every forced smile hurt. Every good morning I said to George was like swallowing shards of glass. I started paying attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. The different perfume on his clothes, the lipstick stains that sometimes appeared on his shirt collars, always in shades I would never wear. It was like I was assembling a macabre puzzle of my own betrayal. A week after finding the receipt, I was hanging laundry on the line in the backyard when I saw Sabrina, our neighbor, pulling into her driveway. She had lived next door for 5 years, ever since she was widowed. A 38-year-old blonde woman, always impeccably dressed, even just to go to the grocery store. I had always treated her with affection, like a daughter. When her husband died in a car accident, I was the one who brought her meals for weeks. I looked after her kids, John, 14, and Maria, 11, when she had pneumonia and had to be hospitalized. I lent her money when she said she was struggling. Sabrina had always been polite, kind, a person I trusted completely. But that afternoon, as I watched her get out of her car, something caught my eye. She was wearing a necklace that looked familiar, a gold chain with stones that sparkled in the sun. My heart raced as I recognized the piece. It was an exact match to the description on the receipt I had found. My blood ran cold, and for a moment I couldn't move. I just stood there holding a wet shirt, water dripping onto the concrete patio. It couldn't be. Not her. Not the woman I had welcomed as family, who had cried on my shoulder when she lost her husband, whom I had comforted through difficult nights. But the more I looked, the more glaring details emerged. The perfectly manicured nails, the salon-styled hair, clothes far too expensive for someone living on a deceased husband's pension. How had I never noticed this before? How could I have been so blind? During lunch, I tried to casually probe George about Sabrina. I asked if he thought she was doing okay financially, if she needed help with anything around the house. He nearly choked on his food and quickly changed the subject, saying he didn't meddle in other people's lives. His reaction was so over the top that it confirmed my suspicions. It was her. It was Sabrina. The woman I treated like a daughter was having an affair with my husband. That afternoon, after George left for the shop, I feigned a headache and went to lie down. But as soon as I heard his car pull away, I got up and went to the bedroom window that overlooked Sabrina's house. I stood there watching, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Around 3 o'clock, I saw a car park discreetly on the street behind her house. A car I knew very well. It was George's. It felt as though the world had stopped. My legs went weak, and I had to lean against the windowsill to keep from falling. I saw my husband get out of the car, look both ways to make sure no one was watching, and slip in through Sabrina's back door. The pain I felt in that moment was indescribable, like 1,000 needles piercing my chest all at once. I stood at the window for 2 hours, hidden behind the curtain, watching. When George finally left, Sabrina appeared at the door wearing only a robe. They shared a long kiss before he departed, like a couple in love saying goodbye. She waved to him from the window, smiling in a way I had never seen her smile before. It was an intimate smile, full of complicity and shared secrets. When George got home at the end of the day, I was in the kitchen peeling potatoes for dinner. My hands were shaking so much I cut myself twice with the knife, but I didn't even feel the pain. All the pain in my body was concentrated in my shattered heart. He walked in whistling a tune, happier than I'd seen him in months. He came up behind me and tried to hug me, but my body stiffened involuntarily. During dinner, I could barely eat. I watched George talk about trivial things, about a difficult customer at the shop, about the weather getting warmer. How could he do it? How could he sit there across from me, share my table, talk about his day, knowing he had spent the afternoon in bed with our neighbor? How could he kiss my forehead when he left the house, and then kiss another woman's mouth? That night, when we went to bed, George tried to get close to me. For the first time in 42 years of marriage, I rejected him. I said I had a headache, that I didn't feel well. He seemed annoyed, muttered something about me being strange lately, and rolled over. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling as if my entire life had been a lie. The next day, when Sabrina came over to borrow sugar as she often did, I had to use every ounce of my willpower not to scream in her face. She was radiant, her skin glowing, with that gold necklace around her neck. She chatted about trivial things, her kids, the weather, while I watched her with new eyes. How could she look me in the eye after betraying my trust in the cruelest way possible? When she left, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried like I hadn't cried in years. I cried for everything I had lost, for the broken trust, for the years of dedication that now seemed worthless. I cried for the humiliation of being deceived by 2 people I had loved and trusted. And I cried because I knew my life would never be the same. But as the tears streamed down my face, something else began to grow inside me, a cold, calculating anger I never knew I possessed. They thought I was a fool, that I would never find out. They thought they could keep deceiving me indefinitely, laughing behind my back while I took care of the house and saved every penny. They were dead wrong. I was going to find out just how far this betrayal went, and when I knew everything, they would pay dearly for what they were doing to me. In the days that followed, I became a detective in my own life. I started writing everything down in an old notebook I kept in a kitchen drawer. The times George left, when he returned, how often the phone rang and he stepped out to answer. I paid attention to the smallest details, like the different way he chose his clothes in the morning, always picking the nicest ones on the days I knew he would be seeing her. It was a daily torture, but I needed to know the extent of the betrayal. One morning while George was in the shower, His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text message, and on an impulse I didn't understand myself, I glanced at the screen. It was her. "Can't wait to see you today, my love. Kisses." My blood boiled. They called each other love. They had the intimacy of a couple, while I was treated like a stranger in my own home. I quickly jotted down her number in my notebook and went back to the kitchen before George got out of the shower. I decided to dig deeper into our finances. I went to the bank where George had his account for decades, and since we were married, I was able to get access to the statements. What I found left me in a state of shock. There were regular, large cash withdrawals, always on Wednesdays, amounts that were draining our emergency fund, the money we were saving for retirement, for potential health problems in the future. But the worst was yet to come. While talking to Nancy, the bank teller who had known me for years, I discovered that George had taken out a $15,000 loan 6 months ago, using our house as collateral. Our house! The house where we built our family, where I raised my children, where I thought I would spend my final years in peace. He had risked it all without even consulting me. Nancy, seeing my distress, quietly told me that George had been at the bank the previous week with a blonde woman, opening a joint account. I didn't need any more details to know who it was. They were planning a future together with our money, with our house, with everything I had helped build over a lifetime of work and dedication. That afternoon when I got home, I found Sabrina in my yard, chatting with Dorothy, our other neighbor. They were laughing about something, and when they saw me, Sabrina came over with that fake smile I now knew how to recognize. "Hi, Norma. I was just telling Dorothy what a wonderful neighbor you've been all these years. A real mother to me." Her words were like daggers. A real mother. I, who had comforted her, cared for her children, treated her like family. I managed to smile and say that I considered her special too. But inside I was screaming. I wanted to ask her how she could look me in the eye, how she could speak of consideration and affection while destroying my family. But I held back. It wasn't time to confront them yet. I needed to find out more, to better understand their plans. That night, I pretended to be asleep when George got a call. He whispered into the phone, thinking I couldn't hear. "I can't talk right now. She's right next to me. Yes, I know, love. I miss you too. We'll be free of all this soon, I promise. Free of all this." I was all this to him now, an obstacle to his happiness with his mistress. The next day, I discreetly followed George. He said he was going to the shop, but instead, he stopped at a real estate agency downtown. I waited, hidden behind a lamppost, until he came out. When I went inside, the realtor, a pleasant woman named Myrtle, around 50, recognized me from the community. I casually asked if there were any condos for rent at the beach, saying I was thinking of moving. That's when she told me that George had been there the previous week with a blonde woman looking for condos in Myrtle Beach. They wanted something move-in ready, furnished for a quick relocation. The realtor even commented on what a loving couple they seemed to be, always holding hands, him being so attentive to her. My stomach turned. They were planning to run away together, to leave Maple Creek, to leave the life I had helped build. When I got home, I locked myself in the bedroom and let the tears flow. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an elaborate plan to abandon me and steal everything that was ours. I thought of my grandson Jacob, who depended on our help for his medical treatment. I thought of my children, who would find out their father had abandoned their mother after decades of marriage. I thought about how I would explain it to the neighbors, to the community that had known us for so long. But it was in that moment of deepest despair that I received a call that would change everything. It was Marcia, my daughter, sobbing hysterically. Jacob had gotten sick at school, had a severe respiratory attack and had to be rushed to the hospital. The doctors said he needed more intensive treatment, more expensive medications, physical therapy 3 times a week. The cost would be at least $1,000 a month. I hung up the phone in a panic. How were we going to help Jacob if George was spending our money on his mistress? How were we going to pay for my grandson's treatment if he had compromised our savings with gifts for Sabrina? The anger I felt transformed into something much more intense. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my family, about my sick grandson, who depended on our help. That evening when George came home, I told him about Jacob's situation. I asked him to help me find the money for the treatment. His reaction shocked me. He said we were perhaps spoiling the boy too much, that kids always have health problems, that we couldn't sacrifice so much for it. His words were cold, calculating, so different from the man I knew. It was then that I understood he no longer wanted to spend money on us because he was saving it all for his new life with Sabrina. My grandson, my family, our marriage, none of it mattered to him anymore. I looked at the man who had shared my bed for 42 years, and I didn't recognize him. It was as if a stranger had taken the place of my children's father, of Jacob's grandfather. But if he thought I was going to accept this passively, that I would let my family be left helpless while he built a new life, he was gravely mistaken. A strength I never knew I possessed began to grow inside me. They had picked the wrong target to deceive. I was not the fragile, submissive woman they thought I was, and they were about to find that out in the worst way possible. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of my life. Depression consumed me like a black hole. I stopped eating properly, losing so much weight that my clothes hung loosely on my frame. I couldn't sleep anymore, spending my nights wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how everything had fallen apart. I stopped taking care of the house. The garden plants withered and dust gathered on the furniture. It was as if I were dying from the inside out. George pretended to be concerned, but I saw the relief in his eyes when he found me sprawled on the couch in my bathrobe with no energy for anything. He even commented to Dorothy, our neighbor, that I was going through a difficult phase, that maybe I needed medical help. It was convenient for him that I was this way. It made his plans with Sabrina easier. A depressed wife is easier to abandon than an active, alert one. It was during this dark period that my sister Carmela came to visit. She lives in Dayton, has worked as a legal secretary for over 20 years, and has always been sharper than me about these things in life. Carmela, at 61, had a direct way of speaking that sometimes hurt, but she was always honest with me. When she saw me in that state, she was horrified. "Norma, what the hell is happening to you? You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed where I spent most of my days. I tried to make excuses, saying it was just exhaustion, but Carmela knew me too well. She pressed me so much that I ended up telling her everything. The receipt, the discovery about Sabrina, the loan, the plans to run away, his refusal to help Jacob. Carmela was silent for a few minutes, processing everything I had told her. Then, in that firm voice I'd known since childhood, she said, "This isn't going to stand. You are not going to let those 2 scoundrels destroy you." That's when she told me something that chilled me to the bone. The previous week, while talking to Angela, an acquaintance who works at the county clerk's office in Dayton, Carmela had discovered that George had been researching how to have someone involuntarily committed for psychological problems. He had asked several questions about the procedures, about how to get medical certificates to prove mental incapacity. My own sister had found it strange at the time, but never imagined it was about me. "He's planning to have you committed, Norma," Carmela said. Her eyes filled with angry tears. "He wants to declare you crazy, so he can take all the assets and marry that tramp next door, without any trouble." The shock was so great that for a moment I couldn't breathe. George wasn't just cheating on me. He was planning to completely destroy me, to remove me from society, to turn me into a mental patient to justify his abandonment. Carmela stayed with me for 3 days, pretending she was just visiting. During that time, she observed George's behavior, saw how he spoke to me, how he treated me when he thought no one was watching. On the last day, she had a serious talk with me that changed my perspective on everything. "You have 2 options, sister," she said, holding my hands. "Either you let them completely destroy you, or you fight back and show them you still have dignity. But if you choose to fight back, you have to be smart. They think you're a fool. Use that to your advantage." That's when we devised a plan. I would continue to feign depression, but in reality, I would be investigating and gathering evidence against them. Carmela taught me how to use the voice recorder on my old cell phone to record conversations, explained how to photograph documents without leaving a trace, and gave me tips on how to follow someone without being noticed. For the next 2 weeks, I pretended to be even more depressed than before. I stayed in my nightgown all day, cried when George was around, and complained of imaginary pains. He even suggested I see a psychologist, that maybe I needed medication for depression. The irony was bitter. He wanted to medicate me so he could later have me committed. But while I feigned fragility, I was working. I discovered they met not only on Wednesdays, but also on Saturday afternoons, when George claimed he was going fishing with friends. I photographed bank statements showing the excessive spending. I recorded phone conversations where he spoke with Sabrina about their plans to move. The most shocking discovery came when, pretending to feel unwell, I asked Sabrina to accompany me to the doctor. During the drive, she was so cynical, I almost lost my composure. She talked about how hard it was to be a young widow, how she sometimes felt lonely, how she needed a man in her life to feel complete. All this while she was destroying the marriage of the woman who treated her like a daughter. But it was on that same day that I discovered something that would completely change the course of my revenge. In the doctor's waiting room, I ran into Eileen, a 67-year-old woman I knew from church. She was with her daughter for an appointment, and we started chatting. When I mentioned I lived in Maple Creek, she grew thoughtful. Maple Creek. I know a woman from there. Someone named Sabrina, who caused a lot of trouble here in Toledo a few years back, she said casually. My heart sped up. I asked for more details, saying I might know the person. Eileen then told me a story that left me in shock. Sabrina had lived in Toledo for 2 years, always getting involved with married men. She would befriend the wives, gain their trust, and then seduce the husbands. She had destroyed at least 3 marriages that Eileen knew of, always following the same pattern, pretending to be a widow, telling a sob story to gain sympathy, and then striking when no one suspected. She was never really married, Eileen continued. She made up that widow story to seem harmless. She was a real con artist, a specialist in destroying families. The revelation left me dizzy. Sabrina wasn't the grieving widow I had taken in. She was a professional predator, and I had been just another victim. When we got home from the doctor's appointment, I looked at Sabrina with new eyes. She said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek, saying she hoped I felt better soon. Her words sounded even more false now that I knew the truth about her. She wasn't just a neighbor who had fallen in love with my husband. She was an experienced con artist who had targeted our family. That night, I called Carmela and told her everything I had discovered. She was furious but also excited. Now we have real information to work with, she said. If she did this in other towns, she must have left a trail. We're going to dig deeper. But as we planned our investigation, I had no idea that the situation was about to get even worse. The next day, I would receive a call that would show me the problem was much bigger than I imagined, and that Jacob, my dear grandson, was about to pay the highest price for George and Sabrina's greed. The call I received the next morning made me feel as if the world had collapsed for good. It was Marcia, crying desperately on the other end of the line. Jacob had had an even more severe respiratory crisis during the night and was in the ICU at the hospital in Columbus. The doctors said they couldn't wait any longer. He needed to start an intensive treatment immediately, with medications that cost $3,000 a month. Mom, I don't know what to do anymore, Marcia sobbed into the phone. The doctor said if we don't start the treatment this week, Jacob's condition could become much more complicated. I've already taken out loans. I've sold everything I could, but I have nowhere else to get this money. My heart broke listening to my daughter's desperation. Jacob was a cheerful, intelligent boy. He didn't deserve to be going through this. When I hung up, I immediately went to find George at the shop. I found him fixing a car, whistling a happy tune, as if he didn't have a care in the world. I told him about Jacob's situation, about the urgency of the treatment, about how we needed to help our daughter in this difficult time. His reaction left me speechless. "Norma, you need to drop this," he said without even looking up from the car's engine. "That boy always has something, always needs some expensive medicine. Marcia has to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. We can't be supporting other people's problems our whole lives." Other people. He was calling our own grandson other people. I insisted, explaining it was a serious health issue, that we couldn't let a child suffer for lack of money. That's when he stopped what he was doing, looked me in the eye with a coldness I had never seen before, and said the words that would scar me forever. "The money we have saved isn't to be spent on some spoiled kid's made-up illnesses. We have our own plans for the future. Our plans. As if I knew of any plans. As if I were part of his plans." In that moment, I understood he wasn't just betraying me. He was discarding me like an old object that was no longer useful. And worst of all, he was denying help to his own grandson to protect the money he intended to use with his mistress. I left the shop shattered and went straight home. I called Carmela and told her everything. She was so furious she shouted into the phone, "That man has lost all sense of shame, denying help to his own grandson to fund some tramp." That's when she made me a proposal that would change everything. "Norma, it's time to act. We can't wait anymore. This man is willing to let a child suffer to pay for his mistress's whims. I'm going to help you investigate this Sabrina for real, and we're going to find out everything about her." Carmela had a friend who worked at the DMV, another who was a public employee in Toledo, and a cousin who dealt with records at the county offices. She would use all her contacts to uncover the truth about Sabrina's past. While Carmela worked on the investigations, I focused on spying on George and Sabrina more systematically. I discovered that, besides Wednesdays and Saturdays, they also met on Monday mornings, when I was supposedly sleeping due to my depression. I learned to recognize the signs: when George took a long shower early in the morning, when he chose his clothes with extra care, when he sprayed on extra cologne. One morning, I pretended to be asleep and watched through a crack in the curtains as he left. Instead of going to the shop, he went straight to Sabrina's house. I waited a few minutes, and using the excuse that I was worried because he had forgotten his lunch, I went over there. The house was closed up, but I could hear laughter coming from her bedroom. Intimate laughter, whispers, sounds that made me feel nauseous. It was in that moment that I made a decision that would change everything. I took my phone out of my pocket and started recording the sounds coming from inside the house. It wasn't just to have proof. It was so they would know when the time came that I had witnessed every moment of their betrayal. I recorded for 15 minutes before going back home, pretending nothing had happened. 3 days later, Carmela called me with information that left me in shock. Through her contacts, she had discovered that Sabrina's real name wasn't Sabrina. Her real name was Sandra Olson, and she had an extensive criminal history. She had been sued for fraud in 3 different cities: Toledo, Akron, and Canton. In every case, the pattern was the same. She would get close to families, gain their trust, seduce the husbands, and then carry out financial scams. But there's more, Norma, Carmela continued. She was never a widow. In fact, she's legally married to a man named Robert Silva, who lives in Columbus. They run scams together. She seduces the husbands, and he handles the financial side, creating fake accounts and transferring money. The revelation left me dizzy. Sabrina wasn't just destroying my marriage. She was running an elaborate scam. And worse, George wasn't the love of her life. He was just another victim. She was using my husband the same way she had used other men in other cities. The difference was that George was so blinded by passion that he didn't realize he was being scammed too. That afternoon, when George came home, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner as usual. But this time I had a powerful weapon: knowledge. I watched his every move with new eyes. The way he checked his phone every minute, waiting for her messages. The way he smiled when he read something she sent. He was in love with a lie, with a woman who didn't even really exist. During dinner, I tried to bring up Jacob's situation one more time. I said my daughter had called again, that the boy's condition was getting worse, that we needed to make an urgent decision about the treatment. George didn't even look up from his plate and repeated the same thing. We don't have money to spend on that right now. It was in that moment that something inside me broke. It wasn't just anger or pain. It was a cold, calculated determination that took over my entire being. I looked at the man who had shared my bed for 42 years, who was the father of my children, the grandfather of my grandson, and I felt nothing but contempt. He had chosen an unknown con artist over his own family. "All right, George," I said with a calmness that surprised me. "If you don't want to help our grandson, I understand. Everyone has their priorities." He seemed relieved by my reaction, probably thinking I had finally accepted the situation. He had no idea I was planning a revenge that would destroy not only him, but the entire farce Sabrina had built. That night, I called Carmela and said, "It's time. Let's end this charade, once and for all." She was excited on the other end of the line. We knew that the 4th of July festival in Maple Creek was approaching, when the entire community gathered in the town square. George was always one of the organizers, known for his impeccable reputation in town. It would be the perfect stage for our revenge. But as we planned every detail of what would happen at the festival, I had no idea I would discover something even more shocking about Sabrina. Something that would prove she wasn't just a common con artist, but a criminal far more dangerous than any of us could have imagined. The most devastating discovery about Sabrina came from where I least expected it. Carmela had asked her cousin Val, who worked at the county clerk's office in Akron, to dig deeper into Sandra Olson's records. What she found was far worse than anything we had imagined. Sabrina wasn't just a con artist. She had abandoned 3 young children in Akron when she fled with the money from her last scam there. "Norma, sit down, because this is going to shock you," Carmela said when she called me that morning. "Sandra has 3 kids, an 8-year-old girl, a 6-year-old boy, and another one who's 4. She left them with an elderly aunt who can barely support herself. The children are practically destitute while their mother plays house with other women's husbands." My blood ran cold. A woman who abandons her own children to run scams was capable of anything. But there was more. The investigation revealed that Robert Silva, Sabrina's real husband, was currently in Columbus, passing himself off as single and trying to seduce a wealthy 70-year-old woman. This was how they operated. They each ran scams in different cities and then met up to split the stolen money. They even had a joint bank account in Robert's name where they deposited the profits from their scams. The most shocking piece of information came when Val discovered that Sabrina was pregnant. She had done tests at a clinic in Columbus using her fake name, and the pregnancy was already in its 3rd month. My world spun when I heard this. She was pregnant with George's child, and hadn't told him yet. She was using the pregnancy as a trump card to ensure he wouldn't back out of the plan to leave everything and run away with her. That same day, I decided to confront Sabrina indirectly. I went to her house with a cake, pretending to be the ever-helpful neighbor. I found her in the bathroom, vomiting, clearly suffering from morning sickness. When I asked if she was okay, she made up an excuse about something she ate that didn't agree with her. But I knew the truth. She was pregnant and planning to use the baby to manipulate my husband. During our conversation, Sabrina was more cynical than ever. She talked about how she was thinking of moving, that Maple Creek was becoming too small for her. She said she had met a wonderful man who could give her the life she deserved. You know, Norma, sometimes a woman has to think about her own future, even if it hurts some people she likes. Every word was a stab in my heart. When I got back home, I found George going through papers at the kitchen table. They were documents for the house, deeds, loan papers. He was getting everything in order to facilitate a sale. When he saw me, he tried to hide the papers, but it was too late. "Just organizing our things," he lied shamelessly. "You know how messy these papers can get." That night, I pretended to be asleep and overheard a phone conversation that confirmed all my worst fears. He was talking to Sabrina, finalizing the details of their escape. "Yes, love, everything will be sorted out by the end of the month," he whispered. "I'm going to talk to her about the commitment next week. The doctor already said that, with her condition, it will be easy to get the papers. They were really planning to have me committed to get everything. George had found a doctor who, for money, was willing to certify that I had the severe mental problems and needed specialized care. Once I was committed, it would be easy for him to sell the house, take all the money, and disappear with Sabrina. The next day, we had a visit from a man who introduced himself as Dr. Oswald, a psychiatrist. George said he had scheduled the appointment because he was worried about me, that I hadn't been well for months. The doctor was a man of about 45, chubby, with thick glasses, and a fake smile that gave me chills. Throughout the entire conversation, he agreed with everything George said about my mental state. "Have you been sleeping well?" Dr. Oswald asked, jotting everything down in a small notepad. "Have you had episodes of mental confusion, forgetfulness, abrupt mood swings?" I replied that I was just tired, that I was going through a difficult time, but that there was nothing seriously wrong. But he ignored my answers and continued to write as if I were confirming all the symptoms. When the doctor left, I heard George talking to him at the door. "So, doctor, what do you think?" my husband asked with poorly disguised anxiety. "Well, based on the symptoms you described and what I observed today, it really seems to be a case that requires more intensive monitoring," Dr. Oswald replied. "I can have the papers ready in a week." It was in that moment that I understood they were much further along in their plan than I had imagined. In 1 week, I would be declared mentally incompetent and committed against my will. George would be free to sell everything and run away with Sabrina. And worst of all, my grandson Jacob would remain without treatment because there would be no one left to help him. That same afternoon, I called Carmela in desperation. I told her about the doctor's visit, about the commitment plans, about how we were running out of time. "Calm down, sister," she said in that firm voice that always reassured me. "It's time to put our plan into action. We can't wait any longer." Carmela had finished gathering all the information on Sabrina and had located some of the women who had been her victims in other cities. She had also gotten in touch with Robert Silva, her real husband, who didn't even know she was pregnant with another man's child. Our plan was simple but devastating. Expose everything during the 4th of July festivities, when the entire community would be gathered. The 4th of July festival in Maple Creek was a town tradition. Every year, the town square filled with booths, music, dancing, and food. It was when the whole community came together. Entire families participated, and the organizers were always the most respected people in town. George had been one of those organizers for over 10 years, known for his honesty and dedication to the event. It would be the perfect stage for our revenge. On the day of the festival, when George was at the height of his popularity, surrounded by the entire community that respected him, we would reveal who he really was. And Sabrina would discover that she wasn't the only smart person in town, that the foolish woman she had chosen as a victim was far more intelligent than she ever imagined. But as we finalized the preparations for our revenge, something happened that nearly ruined all our plans. 3 days before the 4th of July festival, Sabrina knocked on my door with news that would completely change the game. She had come to tell me, with tears in her eyes and a slightly protruding belly, that she was pregnant with George's child, and that they had decided to make their relationship public. The baby was on its way, and she no longer wanted to hide their love. When Sabrina showed up at my door that day, her eyes red from crying and her hand on her belly, I almost collapsed. She walked into my living room as if she owned the place, sat on my sofa, and began to speak with a false fragility that made me want to throw up. "Norma, I need to tell you something very important. I know this will be hard for you to hear, but I can't hide it anymore." With a trembling voice and tears streaming down her face, she told me she was 3 months pregnant, that she and George were truly in love, that it hadn't been planned, but now they had to think about the baby's future. "I know you've been married for a long time, that you're a good person, but love happened, and we can't go back," she said, as if I were just an obstacle in the path of their happiness. Her performance was flawless. She pretended to be suffering for hurting me, said she never wanted things to happen this way, that if she could go back in time she would change everything. But at the same time, she made it clear that I was the past and she was George's future. "He's going to talk to you tonight. We thought it would be best to be honest, especially now that there's a child involved." After she left, I sat in the living room for nearly an hour, trying to process what I had just heard. It was the final blow, the card she had saved to ensure George would never leave her. A baby, a child that would hold him hostage forever, even after she pulled off the scam and disappeared with the money. I immediately called Carmela and told her everything. She was furious but also saw an opportunity. "Perfect, Norma. Now we have even more reason to expose this tramp. Imagine when Robert Silva, her real husband, finds out his wife is pregnant with another man's child. And imagine when George finds out she already has 3 abandoned children and a husband in Columbus." That night, George came home later than usual. He was nervous, sweating, his hands trembling as he poured himself a coffee. I pretended to be washing dishes as if it were just another normal day, waiting for him to work up the courage to speak. Finally, after dinner, he asked me to sit down in the living room. "Norma, we need to have a serious talk," he began, unable to look me in the eye. "I know this will be difficult for you, but I've fallen in love with someone else." I feigned shock, put my hand to my heart, and asked how it could have happened. He told the romanticized version of the story, how he had met Sabrina, how they had fallen madly in love, how they had fought against the feeling, but couldn't resist. When he told me about the pregnancy, I feigned a fainting spell. I collapsed on the living room floor, screamed, cried, and put on all the drama he expected from a betrayed wife. George was flustered, tried to calm me down, said he didn't want to hurt me, but that he had to think about the future of his child. "You'll be okay, Norma. I'll leave you the house. You won't be left with nothing." His lie was grotesque. I knew very well he had no intention of leaving me with anything. The plan was to have me committed and take it all. But I pretended to believe him, pretended I was willing to accept the situation for the good of everyone. "If this is what makes you happy, George, I accept," I said between sobs. "I just want you to be happy. In the 2 days leading up to the 4th of July festival, I lived through the most surreal situation of my life. George and Sabrina began to act like an official couple, coming and going from the house openly, with her even coming over for dinner as if she were part of the family. I had to smile, be nice, and pretend everything was normal while they planned my future right in front of me. Sabrina even had the audacity to suggest I be the maid of honor at their wedding. You've always been like a mother to me, Norma. It would be an honor to have you by our side at this special moment. Her hypocrisy knew no bounds. She wanted me to bless their union after she had destroyed my family. On the eve of the festival, Carmela arrived in Maple Creek with some of the women we had located, previous victims of Sabrina from other cities. Patricia, 52, from Toledo, who lost her life savings to Sabrina's scams. Regina, 48, from Akron, whose husband ran off with Sabrina, taking all the family's money. And Connie, 61, from Canton, who discovered her husband had sold their house to fund the con artist's whims. They all had stories identical to mine. Sabrina would approach, pretending to be a grieving widow, gain the wives' trust, seduce the husbands, and then carry out elaborate financial scams. Hearing these women share their experiences was both painful and liberating. Painful because I saw my own suffering mirrored in them, and liberating because it confirmed that I wasn't crazy, that there was truly something very wrong with Sabrina. On the day of the 4th of July festival, the town square in Maple Creek was as beautiful as ever. Colorful banners, food stalls, a stage for dance and music performances. George was in his element, organizing everything, greeting everyone, being the respected man he had always been in the community. Sabrina was by his side, radiant, already discreetly showing off her belly to some of the women, playing the role of the devoted future wife. Around 8 o'clock at night, when the festival was at its peak, with hundreds of people in the square, I walked up onto the stage. I asked the MC for a moment, saying I wanted to make a special announcement. George looked at me, surprised but smiled, thinking I was going to say something nice about our amicable separation. "Good evening, everyone in Maple Creek," I began, holding the microphone with steady hands. I wanted to take advantage of this wonderful celebration to share with you a very important discovery I made recently. I looked directly at George and Sabrina, who were in the front row, still not understanding what was happening. For 42 years, I believed I knew my husband. I believed he was an honest, hard-working man, dedicated to his family. But I've learned that people can surprise you, and not always in a good way. The crowd started to pay closer attention, sensing that something important was about to happen. That's when I signaled to Carmela, who brought the 3 women onto the stage. "I'd like to introduce you to some friends who have come from other cities, especially to meet our dear neighbor, Sabrina," I said, pointing to her in the audience. Sabrina's face instantly went pale. What happened in the next few minutes was devastating. One by one, the women told their stories into the microphone, describing in detail how Sabrina had destroyed their families, how she would feign friendship, seduce their husbands, and carry out elaborate financial scams. The crowd listened in absolute silence, looking back and forth between the women on stage and Sabrina in the audience. When it was my turn to speak again, I revealed her real name, Sandra Olson. I told them about the 3 abandoned children in Akron, about her real husband in Columbus running scams on other victims, about the entire sham she had built to deceive us. With each revelation, the crowd's murmur grew, and Sabrina tried to slip away quietly. But the most devastating moment was yet to come. I took out my phone and played the recording I had made that morning when she was at the house with George. The intimate sounds, the laughter, the conversations about how I was foolish and easy to fool echoed through the town square's speakers. The crowd's silence was broken by exclamations of outrage and disgust. The crowd's reaction was explosive. Cries of indignation echoed through the square, as people understood the magnitude of what had happened. Sabrina tried to run but was surrounded by dozens of furious women demanding an explanation. George stood paralyzed in the middle of the crowd, his face red with shame, trying to process how his 42-year reputation had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. But the final blow was yet to come. At the height of the commotion, a man of about 35 appeared in the square, looking for Sandra Olson. It was Robert Silva, Sabrina's real husband, whom Carmela had contacted and invited to the festival. When he saw Sabrina there, pregnant and being confronted by the crowd, he immediately understood what was happening. "Sandra!" he yelled, pushing his way through the people. "What the hell are you doing here? And whose baby is that you're carrying?" The scene was devastating. Sabrina tried to deny it, said she didn't know the man, but Robert had documents, photographs, irrefutable proof that they had been married for 8 years and had 3 children together. George was in total shock as Robert explained to the entire town square how their scheme worked, how Sabrina seduced married men while he ran other scams in different cities, how they split the stolen money and moved when things got too hot. "She's probably not even really pregnant," Robert said with contempt. "She's faked pregnancies before to manipulate her victims." That's when something no one expected happened. One of the women in the crowd, Mrs. Gable, who had worked as a nurse at the local clinic for 30 years, offered to examine Sabrina right there, in front of everyone. "If she's really pregnant, I can confirm it just by feeling her belly," the experienced nurse said. Sabrina tried to refuse, but the crowd's pressure was so intense she had no choice. Mrs. Gable examined her and confirmed that she was indeed pregnant, but she also discovered something else. From the signs she observed, the pregnancy was only about 6 weeks along, not 3 months, as Sabrina had claimed. The baby wasn't even George's. The dates didn't line up with the start of their relationship. The final revelation was devastating for George. He realized he had been deceived in every possible way. Not only was Sabrina married with other children, but the baby she was carrying wasn't even his. It had been just another lie to manipulate him. There, in front of the entire community that had respected him, my husband of 42 years broke down and began to cry like a child. The crowd was split between consoling George and driving Sabrina out of town. Robert, furious at being betrayed by his own wife, said he was taking her back to Columbus to settle things with her. Sabrina, completely unmasked and humiliated, fled the square, followed by the jeers of hundreds of people. In the days that followed, the story spread throughout Maple Creek and neighboring towns. George lost not only his wife and his mistress, but also the reputation he had built over decades. Customers began to cancel appointments at his shop. Neighbors avoided him on the street, and he became the subject of jokes and malicious gossip all over town. A week after the public exposure, George came to see me. I found him on the porch, sitting on the steps like a beggar, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His first words were a desperate plea for forgiveness. "Norma, I ruined everything. I lost the most important woman in my life for a con artist. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at the man who had shared my life for 42 years and felt a mixture of pity and coldness. "George," I said with a calmness that surprised me, "you didn't just lose a wife. You lost your dignity, your honor, the respect of the community, and worst of all, you denied help to your own sick grandson to fund the whims of a con artist." It was then that he told me the whole truth about the loan, about the bank account he had opened for Sabrina, about the $15,000 she had stolen before fleeing town. He had lost not only our retirement savings, but had also gone into serious debt. Our house was truly at risk because of the loan he had taken out. "I'll do anything to fix this," he pleaded. "I'll work day and night. I'll sell the shop if I have to, but I will get our money back and save our house." For a moment, I felt sorry for this broken man, but then I remembered everything he had put me through. how he had planned to have me committed to take everything. 3 months later, I filed for divorce. I was able to keep the house and half of the auto shop, as everything had been built during our marriage. George didn't contest it. In fact, he seemed relieved I didn't demand more. He knew he deserved to lose much more than he did. The best part of this whole story was being able to help my grandson, Jacob. With my share from the shop, I was able to pay for his treatment in full. Today, a year later, the boy is completely recovered, playing and studying like any other kid. Marcia, my daughter, cried with joy when she saw her son healthy again, and she thanked me for fighting for our family when it mattered. Sabrina was never seen in Maple Creek again. We heard from Robert that she had fled to New York, where she is likely running the same scams on new victims. Her 3 children in Akron were placed in state care, as both she and Robert are wanted by the law for fraud. George tried to rebuild his life but could never recover his reputation in town. He ended up selling his half of the shop and moving to Dayton, where he works as an employee at an auto parts company. Sometimes he calls me, always on our children's birthdays or on Christmas, trying to maintain some kind of family connection. I am polite but cold. Some wounds never fully heal. Today at 65, I live alone in my house, but I don't feel lonely. I have my independence, my dignity, and most importantly, the respect of the Maple Creek community. People see me as a strong woman who knew how to fight for her rights when she needed to. Several women in town have come to me for advice on troubled relationships. Carmela, my sister, moved to Maple Creek to be closer to me. She says I'm her hero, that I showed that a 64-year-old woman can be smarter than any professional con artist. We take care of each other, travel together, and enjoy the life we have left without depending on any man. What makes me proudest is knowing that Jacob grew up watching his grandmother fight for her family. He always tells me that when he grows up, he wants to be strong like me. Sometimes when I look back, I think that maybe this betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. It showed me that I was much stronger and smarter than I ever imagined. I learned that no matter how old you are, it's never too late to defend your dignity. That a woman who dedicated 42 years to her home can be a fierce warrior when she needs to protect her family. And that, underestimating the intelligence of a woman who has raised children and managed a household her entire life, is the biggest mistake anyone can make. George and Sabrina thought I was a fool, that I would never find out, that they could discard me like an old piece of furniture. They were completely mistaken. In the end, they lost everything. The money, the reputation, the future they had planned, while I reclaimed my dignity and built a new life based on my own worth. Today, when I walk through the town square where our revenge took place, I smile remembering that night. It was the moment a 64-year-old woman proved to an entire town that life experience is worth more than any scam, and that the truth always triumphs in the end. They thought I was a fool, but they were wrong, and they paid dearly for that arrogance.